Study Hall Data Literacy is sponsored by Google. Has your mind ever wandered while you're at your favorite coffee shop waiting for a barista to craft your grande non-fat iced latte with 2 pumps of caramel? Hold the whip. I'll just be bopping along to the obligatory easy listening song in the background, and just like that, a random thought pops into my head. I wonder if the ratio of chain coffee shops to local coffee shops is fairly constant across cities. Okay, no, I didn't really think the word ratio, but this is how data stories often start, with serendipity. Like, now I really want to know the answer to this coffee shop question. We could manually collect some data in our own city by walking around and keeping a tally of coffee shops, or places like Yelp and Google Maps can help us search specific areas. All those skills we've built up to identify the story in other people's data can be put to use to tell our own stories. So let's roll up our sleeves and find our own data. And with all of our data literacy skills, we don't need to stop at questions about coffee. I'm Jessica Pucci, and welcome to Study Hall Data Literacy, presented by Arizona State University and Crash Course. We've talked a lot about how to assess whether a data story is convincing, but now we want to be on the other side. As someone who's telling a data story, we have to make sure our question is one that actually can be answered with data. A narrow scope keeps the story manageable. We might start off wondering something like, do people like coffee? And that seems hard to answer. What people? What kind of coffee? And what do we mean by like? Behind a broad question are usually a bunch of smaller questions. Maybe we decide drinking lots of coffee means people like it. So we could ask, which country or state buys the most coffee? Or we could decide liking coffee has something to do with how many coffee shops are in a city and ask, which city has the most coffee shops per person? And when we're refining our question, it also helps to be specific. Maybe we've narrowed our question to, what is the ratio of chain to local coffee shops across cities? We care about the balance of coffee shops, but to understand that, we'll first need to define what we mean by chain and local. Like, if there's a local coffee shop that has 2 or 3 locations, does that veer into chain territory? We'll also need to decide on our geographical boundaries, like if the suburbs should count when we're comparing different cities. All of these are different directions we could take to measure or quantify our original question and find an answer with data. Next step, data collection. Translating our question into a concrete data finding mission might remind us to pay special attention to variables we can look for or visit. Like in the chain versus local question, we can collect our own observational data, the counts of different types of shops. Other times, the question may require us to get data through an experiment, like having people rank different beverages and seeing where coffee falls on average. There's a little more planning and ethics involved here, so we'll need to include some design time. Now, we're data savvy enough to gather data to help us find answers. It just comes down to asking the right question, which could mean life or death. Let's get to it in the data point. Let's go back in time before people knew about germs. Like London in 1854, where a bout of cholera broke out. Today we know cholera is an infection that sets up in our small intestine and eventually leads to dangerous dehydration. It commonly spreads through contaminated water and food, and it was a leading cause of death in the 19th century. In fact, it's still a major problem today, and cholera outbreaks do exist in the 21st century. But at the time, the main answer to the question, how does cholera spread, was bad air. Though some had their doubts, like a doctor named Jon Snow. Sorry, Game of Thrones fans, different Jon Snow. Snow decided to investigate the cases and look for patterns that would give some insight into how it spread. He narrowed the question to, where are cholera cases located? And here comes the big insight. People didn't know about germs, and they didn't have running water either. By observing cases and plotting his data on a map of the city, Snow noticed that cases were clustered around a particular water pump where families got their household water. There were some exceptions, though, so Snow went further and investigated some outliers, places far from the pump that still had a lot of cholera and places near the pump that didn't. Some lucky places had their own well, so they didn't use the contaminated pump. Other unlucky people had visited restaurants that actually served water from the contaminated pump. It turned out that the pump in question was providing water that was polluted by sewage. Snow hadn't proved anything about germs, but the data was so convincing, not to mention accessible to policymakers, that the well was put out of commission. Jon Snow isn't just considered the father of epidemiology, he's also one of the best-known people to use data to influence policymakers and create one of the first infographics. His study of cholera patterns provided a convincing story about how the spread of cholera had to be connected to water rather than air, and advocated for a clear decision. Even though Snow's theory wasn't a commonly held belief, he was still able to change people's minds through a visual argument, something we still rely on to tell stories with data today. Like Snow, we often have a question and then go off in search of data to help us answer it. Open data that's freely accessible for anyone to download, explore, and share is one of the best tools to start with. Everyone brings their own questions and approaches for analyzing a data set. So the more people who have access to the data set, the more insights can be found in the data. And if we share our stories, these insights can help us improve aspects of our lives across the economy, our health, the technology we rely on, even our own safety. Some of the biggest data organizations and collectors in the world recognize this and maintain quality data everyone can access. Like if we're asking questions about what people are thinking, the Pew Research Center might have collected that data for us already in one of their public opinion polls. They release data from their surveys covering topics from US politics to social trends to technology usage. Maybe you're wondering how people feel about online dating. Or is money on the brain? The World Bank has a collection of open data about topics like finance, global development, and poverty. We could investigate how different countries' wealth has changed or how education has spread throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The US government and the EU both have their own collections of open data covering a variety of topics like agriculture, business, crime, and the environment. Like for specific water, climate, or even ocean-related questions within the US, the local climatological data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has us covered. By visiting their websites and downloading their collections of data, we could dive deep, like determining how ocean temperatures have changed near our favorite beach over time. For other government data, remember that you have the right to request records from federal agencies via the Freedom of Information Act. When we're seeking answers to questions about the inner workings of the government and we can't find it online, FOIA it. Open data is great, but on the flip side, we want to be wary of data privacy and security concerns too. So it's probably not surprising that some data sets can't be open. Sure, the World Health Organization makes some general health-related data open to the public, but individual medical records aren't open for just anyone to dig through. Same with much of the US Census demographic, economic, and population data. There's a lot that's made publicly available, but by law, the government can't release any information about us that could identify us. Actually, this mandate is taken so seriously that the census has recently had to change how it reports its data so we can't use new methods and small details to identify people. For example, a census block is an area with anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand people. It's probably unlikely that you're the only woman, the only Latina, or the only person in the 20 to 24 age group in the block. But it's much more likely that you're the only Latina woman between 20 to 24 in the block. In groups of small people, those who don't fit the majority profile may be more vulnerable to being identified, even in aggregated data. And with all of these data sets hanging around with both data about our preferences and demographics, social media, more specialized matching can be possible. Even if you're one of many white males in the 30 to 34 age group, you may be the only accountant who graduated from Arizona State University who has a fish named Sally and whose favorite color is maroon. It's so important that everyone is counted in your country's census because these population counts are used for huge government decisions, like how US House of Representatives seats are split between states and how federal funds are allocated across the country. But protecting people's data privacy is just as important. So to keep sharing this data that so many researchers rely on, the census folks have had to adapt when sharing their findings. Once we get data, either from an open source like the local census or the World Bank, by FOIA-ing it or collecting our own, it's time to start exploring. Sometimes we don't have a particular question, but we come across a data set that's too interesting to pass up. Google has a public data explorer that helps us navigate public data from other sources. In it, there are even some visualization tools, so we can spend an afternoon just browsing for something interesting. Once we have data in hand, it's best to first just lay eyes on it. There might be values missing that will mess with our visualizations, or we might see there's just 10 rows and we need to go find more. Let's finally look for some answers about that local versus chain coffee shop conundrum. To turn that initial thought into a story worth telling, we can rely on some big picture guiding questions, like what surprises us, or what doesn't surprise us. Findings that subvert our expectations or back up an inkling can make compelling data stories. Like Raleigh, North Carolina has 1,000 Starbucks? That seems like a lot. Next, what types of data are we working with? Thinking back to our discussion of data visualizations, remember that certain types of graphs tell certain types of stories. Like, do we have variables associated with geography, like latitude and longitude coordinates or counties? Sounds like a job for a map. And actually, a coffee shop map would be pretty helpful. We could color code cities by the ratio of chain coffee to local coffee and see if there are any patterns that we want to investigate further. Or maybe, what new variables can we craft? Maybe we have counts of different types of coffee shops, but what we really want is a percentage of non-chain shops per city. Calculate it. And sometimes we don't even need a graph to learn something from our data. An informative table may be enough. Ranking cities by our newly calculated non-chain percentage variable might reveal which cities are most invested in local businesses versus which are heavily invested in chains. If you need more inspiration for what to do with your data, learning about more advanced statistical tools can open new paths for investigation. There are lots of online resources to help you get up to speed, from full courses to quick how-to guides. Whether we have a serious question or just a passing curiosity, we're now data DIY kind of people. Maybe you'll want to start a blog or even your own YouTube channel to share your data findings with the world. Today we learned how to find our own data to answer the questions we have about the world around us and tell our own data stories. We heard about a variety of open data sources we can take advantage of and reminded ourselves that some data is not open for a reason. And in this course we learned, all together now, how to decide what story data is telling us and if we should believe it. Now we have the tools to answer our curiosity, and now's the perfect time. The world needs your perspective on data problems big and small, from uncovering inequalities to predicting the outcome of the next World Cup. I can't wait to see what you do. Thanks for watching Study Hall Data Literacy, which is produced by Arizona State University and the Crash Course team at Complexly. If you like this video and want to keep learning with us here in Study Hall, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about ASU and the videos produced by Crash Course in the links in the description.